Good morning. Years ago, and I haven't seen it recently, but there used to be a popular bumper sticker that you'd see like driving down the highway, and it said, "God is my co-pilot." Remember those? It's a funny thing to think about God as your co-pilot. There's part of me that says if you think God's in the driver's seat or in the passenger seat, maybe you need to switch spots. But God is my co-pilot. If you dug under the surface, I think part of the sentiment there is that you hope that God is with you. Of course, like on the short rides as you go to like Stop and Shop or ShopRite or something like that. But like definitely on 78 or 287 or, goodness gracious, I-95. Like there you definitely need Jesus sitting right there with you, yes? And there's probably a sense of we want God with us as our co-pilot because God is obviously going to offer us protection and security, perhaps will get us there on time and may even get us a good parking spot when we arrive, right? But definitely the security and protection. Apparently, and I did not know this until after the 8 o'clock service, God is my co-pilot didn't originate with a bumper sticker. It's actually the title of a movie about a World War II fighter pilot who asked for God to be his co-pilot. And I would imagine that would go for fighter pilots, but also like when you fly commercially. I have this thing, like I don't always pray when I get in the car to go to Stop and Shop. But whenever I'm on an airplane and the engines really kick in and you start, hurtling down the runway, I always, from the time of being a teenager, I always say a prayer in that moment. And I know that statistics say that you're more likely to get into a car wreck than a plane wreck, but I don't know. That like big bucket of bolts goes up into the sky, and I want to know that Jesus is with me, right? And for a lot of things, but definitely for protection and security, keep that bucket of bolts in the air, please. But also so I arrive on time and my luggage doesn't get lost, right? God remain with us. Security. If you were to go from car to plane to boat, let's just imagine for a moment, I don't know, maybe you're a disciple. And you're about to go on to the Sea of Galilee, and you have Jesus of Nazareth hop in the boat with you. Wouldn't you walk on that boat with a little swagger, right? Like things are going to be okay, right? I mean, if God is going to offer you protection and security in your car and in the air, what's that boat ride with Jesus going to be like? It's going to be smooth sailing, right? Glassy sea, easy breeze, right? And so I think when a massive storm that threatened to swamp the boat hit them, I think they were scared. I also think they were a little surprised. Now, these disciples who are with Jesus, some of them, not all of them, but some of them were professional fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. They grew up on the Sea of Galilee, on the family boat, which may then have become their boat. The Sea of Galilee, FYI, is notorious for being a place where storms frequently come up. The geography of the area, the steep mountains and valleys that are around the Sea of Galilee amplify storms at certain times of the year. The winds are harsher there on the Sea of Galilee than in the surrounding area. And the seabed of the Sea of Galilee isn't calm and gentle. It has deep trenches in it, which cause currents in it. And so the Sea of Galilee is dangerous, but these are some of them, professionals who grew up there. But this storm that comes upon them is so big, it even freaks out the professionals. And Jesus is with them, but what's Jesus doing? He's sleeping. And I love how Mark tells us he's sleeping on the cushion, right? Like he's comfy. Everyone else freaking out, and Jesus is asleep and comfy. And they wake Jesus up. Do you not care that we're about to perish? And Jesus handles the storm and the wind, and the glassy sea does eventually arise. But my guess is that once the disciples hit terra firma again, I bet there was some discussion about what the heck was that? Like, this guy's healing people and casting out demons and making people walk and making people see and changing water into wine, and we had to go through that? When the Gospel of Mark was written down, we think it was written down around the year 70, which is 6 years after the Great Fire of Rome. About half of Rome burned beginning July 18th in the year 64, and it burned for 6 days. It was a incredibly scary event for Romans to live through. So much so that the story of the fire still lives on. What was the emperor doing while Rome burned? He was fiddling. Like, that story still goes on. Like, we still know like something about it. That's how intense it was. And the Romans blamed Nero. And so Nero, he's like, I can't take the heat for this, literally. He's like, eventually he says, it's the Christians who caused the fire of Rome. And either because they set the fire or because their blasphemous new religion against the pagan gods, that caused the fire. But whatever it is, the Christians are at fault. And so Rome went through a period of intense persecution of Christians. I mean, intense, awful, scary persecution of Christians. And we know that some of those Christians asked probably the same question that the disciples asked when they got out of the boat. Why? Why are we going through this? We're the people of God. We're the people of Jesus. We're the people of the guy who heals people and turns water into wine and does great miracles. Why are we going through this terrible, terrible time where our brothers and sisters are being tortured and killed in the most horrific of ways? Why is this happening to us? And when Mark writes his gospel, in the wake of this terrible event and the terrible persecution, scholars note that he has the disciples cross the Sea of Galilee, this scary sea, 5 times. As if like Jesus is constantly taking them to the place that is scary. Because the Christians who were first reading this gospel were going through a time that was scary. And like the disciples would have asked, why did that have to happen? And the Christians in Rome were asking, why did that have to happen? That's not just an old question from a long time ago. I've been a priest for over 2 decades now, and I'll tell you, just about every single week, someone inside the church or outside the church will ask me or ask, in my presence, why am I going through this? Why am I having to go through this terrible time? Why have I suffered like this? I'm a good person. I'm a Christian. I'm a faithful person. Why is this happening to me? And I have to be honest, and I will confess that for a while in my life, I thought that question was a sign of spiritual immaturity. Until things happened to me and I asked that question. And then I was like, oh, okay. Thank you. And I remembered that it's the same question Jesus asks on the cross. He isn't rescued from the cross. He isn't rescued from the pain and suffering of that moment. He lives it with all of its pain and suffering. And there, from the cross, he cries out and asks, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Now, did God forsake him? Did God just turn his back on Jesus and was like off doing something else? No. Of course, God was right there. But just like the disciples would have felt abandoned, and just like the Christians of Rome would have felt abandoned, so did Jesus feel that most human of emotion and ask that most human question, why? Why? Sometimes we go through terrible things that we would not wish on our worst enemy. And we ask that question, why? And we will never have a satisfactory answer to it. There are other things that happen to us that I think we probably could eventually come to see some reason for it, or we could make some reason come out of it. If you've ever thought that that you were a problem solver, how did you learn to be a problem solver? Did you learn to be a problem solver on the days when everything went right? No, you learned to be a problem solver when you hit a problem. If you ever thought that you were like, I'm a resilient person, how did you learn resilience? We learned resilience on the days when the bottom fell out. If you ever thought to myself, I'm a brave person, I have bravery in me, where did we learn bravery? In the moments that the bottom fell out. We are not simply rescued from the terrible things that happen. We are not rescued from bad things. And in fact, if you look through the grand story of Scripture, that is like the whole story. The story of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, isn't just like one great thing after another happening. It's one calamity after another that God eventually brings us out of. The Israelites weren't rescued from ever having to go through slavery in Egypt. But then when they experienced that slavery and they cried out, God heard them and rescued them. Daniel was not just saved from ever having to go into the lion's den, but God was with him in the lion's den. When we heard the story this morning of David and Goliath, David wasn't rescued from having to face Goliath. It's not like Goliath dropped dead on the side of the battlefield before he walked on. David had to face him. And what did David learn in that moment? And what did Israel learn in that moment watching David? What would have been lost if David didn't have to face Goliath there? Jesus wasn't rescued from the cross. He went through the cross. Our faith is not a talisman which just like parts the waters wherever we go, and we never have to face anything that is hard or brutal or awful. Our faith doesn't avoid the cross. Our faith puts the cross front and center. Our faith doesn't avoid the cross. It goes through the cross. And in the cross, we see the hope of resurrection. Our faith doesn't hope to just avoid the storms. Our faith sees the resurrection and hope on the other side of the storms. Our faith does not protect us from every bad day or every bad week or every bad month, but our faith tells us that there is a promise of hope and resurrection on the other side. In a moment, we are going to baptize little Riley. And I so wish, as Riley just lays there asleep and is angelic, I so wish I could stand up here and promise God's just going to surround him and he's never going to have to go through anything and every day is just going to be better than the last day. I can't promise that. But the one thing we can promise is that no matter what day Riley is going through, God is his co-pilot. Amen.